Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Igor Calzan. I'm the principal investigator at the University of Oxford for Replicate EU project, and I'm the work package leader of the work package 8 replication. Welcome. I'm pleased to have you on board today, already in the 5th session, led by the Lighthouse City Bristol in the United Kingdom. Just a brief reminder, the City-to-City Learning Programme is the main replication activity of the EU Replication project that you can contribute to, follow and participate through its main hashtag City2CityLearning and also Replicate EU. In a nutshell, the program kicked off on February the 5th, led by the project leader in Lighthouse City of San Sebastián, followed by Essen, Florence, and the 4th one was led by Lausanne in Switzerland. The first session, the first webinar led by San Sebastián focused on, among others, the smart service provision. The webinar by Essen focused on local entrepreneurial hubs. The third one by Florence in e-charging systems. The 4th one by Lausanne focused on heating. As you can observe, the city learning is a very complex range of complementary topics, and you can watch the sessions in the site www.replicate-project.eu/City2CityLearning. Since the beginning of Replicate EU Lighthouse project back in 2016, we have been preparing the City-to-City Learning Programme 2019 in collaboration with the 3 Lighthouse cities, San Sebastián, Florence, and Bristol today, alongside the 3 follower fellow cities, Essen, Lausanne, and Nilüfer, and their unique related multi-stakeholder framework. During this time, the Lighthouse project have been intensively focused on the implementation of the pilots in the 3 main sectors, energy, mobility, ICT. And alongside this implementation, and in the meantime, we have been carrying out fieldwork research, preparing the follower and the fellow cities to identify the critical factors and their unique compositions of stakeholders. Now it's time to start matching how a diverse set of urban implementations could be adapted and scaled up by considering the composition of stakeholders in each follower fellow cities. As a result, the follower fellow cities will formulate their replication plans based on this program, based on the City-to-City Learning Program. This program has been designed entirely to assist both follower fellow cities and the Lighthouse cities to find a common ground to further include in the replication plans of the follower fellow cities. Thus, this program will last during the whole year, 2019, and continues today with the Lighthouse City Bristol in the UK. Just a practical note that these sessions has been designed to be a private program among Replicate stakeholders. Nevertheless, it will be entirely and publicly accessible just after the webinar session in the Replicate website. When you are going to take part, please introduce yourself, the city that you are representing, and the organization. Generally speaking, Bristol, presenting Bristol, has been acknowledged as a unique smart city approach worldwide. Regarding Bristol's approach uniqueness, and according to the fieldwork research conducted here at the University of Oxford, funded by the Replicate EU project and published in the peer-review open access journal Systems, 2 main conclusions and findings could be revealed in an optimistic fashion for the case of Bristol. First is that Bristol presents itself an increasing effort to experiment with a city-centric approach, given the consideration of smart citizens as decision makers rather than pure data providers. And the second finding is that Bristol is ultimately amalgamating a large number of smart projects in a complex network of interaction with citizens in a prospect of the future that will help on the challenge to foster decision makers' interplay, portraying the city as an open platform. To provide further insights on these relevant findings, I guess we are all excited to hear more about this city-centric approach that Bristol has been implementing so far over the years. So I would like to kindly welcome and introduce Ms. Hallie Hash, who is the Replicate Program Manager in the Bristol City Council. Good morning, Hallie.
Good morning, Igor. How are you today?
Everything all right. How are you in Bristol?
Very well, thanks. The sun's shining.
That's great. Just a brief and introductory question for you. Could you tell us in a nutshell why, in your opinion, the city-centric approach that you advocate from the Bristol City Council could effectively inspire the rest of the 2 Replicate Lighthouse cities, San Sebastián and Florence, and also the 3 follower fellow cities, Essen, Lausanne, and Nilüfer, and also beyond Replicate, the rest of the Horizon 2020 Lighthouse project cities?
Yeah, well, it's not, I have to say clearly, it's not just about Bristol City Council, it's about the city as a whole. We feel that with the expansion of digital services and the tools within the smart cities, we seek to open up a more inclusive and democratic interactions with our citizens. But what we're finding is that the development of smart technology has tended to be very top-down and technically led by the technicians and the product designers. They kind of pigeonhole the citizens as service users, as people to be monitored and sold to as customers, rather than as co-creators of something that's actually useful for the citizens themselves. And I'll give you an example of that. So here in Bristol, we've been hosting many delegations from around the world, which are coming to look at how we are developing our smart city with our citizens. And for example, one of the delegations who have come from Korea, they've built their smart city first, and then have asked residents to come and move in. And what they're finding is that the citizens are going there for work because that's where the work is, but they're actually not wanting to be there in their free time. So they're going back to their original villages and cities for their spare time. So those smart cities are not really doing what they were set out to do. And they're becoming soulless. So that in effect is why people are coming to talk to us in Bristol about our approach and how we can be more inclusive. So as we've said, we believe in working with our citizens to develop technology that address their issues and problems, and to approach and empower people to create an environment where everybody shares the solutions and owns the results of that technology. So today you're going to hear about some key learning about what citizens want to be partners. They want to work together with us and with their cities, not as consumers receiving services that have no control, that they want to be part of the solution themselves.
Okay, thank you very much, Hallie. That sounds very, very inspiring. And as you are rightly saying, it's not just the effort of the British City Council, it's a collective effort by many stakeholders in the Bristol area. So let's try to welcome today the 3 speakers for the 3 slots. We have in the first slot Rachel Clark Helen Manchester, presenting on methodologies and approaches to co-design and citizen sensing mainly. We have the second slot about technology, data, and democracy with Theo Trifonas and So Banks. And the third slot, the One City Approach by Hailey Hash, Rosanna Kichian, and David Tucci. The floor is yours.
Sorry, first of all, I'd like to give you a bit of an introduction about Bristol. Just bear with me. Yeah, so Bristol is the 10th largest city in the UK. We've got approximately 454,000 citizens, and the city's continuing to grow. We're also a very diverse and vibrant city, and internationally connected through our citizens. We have strong cultures and strong trade. We've got citizens in our city from over 180 countries, and we speak about 91 languages. So Bristol is constantly rated as one of the best places to live and visit in the UK, and it also is a very innovative city. If you look through history, you've got the Brunel's Clifton Suspension Bridge and the SS Great Britain, and the invention of Concorde. At the Mobile World Congress in 2018, Bristol was called the Smart City Leader. And we're also the home of the world's best university incubator, Set Squared. But we're also finding as well a lot of the unicorn businesses like Graphcore and Over are also wanting to locate themselves in Bristol. So we've got a very strong productive economy. However, we also have lots of challenges. And the prosperity isn't shared by everybody. So we've got very high costs of living, we've got traffic congestion and high pollution, and there's an acute shortage of housing and equality of opportunity. So I'll give you an example of that. So if you live in certain parts of the city, you've got an 80% chance that your children will go to higher education. However, just a mile down the road, the opportunity is reduced to about 5%. Which is something that is a real big challenge for us and something that we've got to address. So we've got to build on our success to tackle the challenges, but we have to do this together in partnership to recognise each other's strength. So the first slot of our conversation today, called Methodologies and Approaches to Co-Design, I shall introduce Rachel Clark from Norwest Media Centre and Helen Manchester from the University of Bristol.
Thanks very much, Hayley. Given what we've heard from Hayley about Bristol and the commitment to being a fair, inclusive and just city, it is interesting to note that smart city projects are often framed in a neutral, apolitical way, where faith in technology often dominates. Although ideas of the smart city are increasingly full of claims about citizen engagement, in reality, little spaces are often devoted to make this collaboration happen. In Bristol, we believe there is a need to advance the field by rethinking the process of designing and implementing smart cities to increase inclusion.
There was an interesting 2015 report by the UK charity Nesta, which identified several factors that have held smart cities back from delivering what they call real value. And these included not addressing the issues that people really care about and a lack of integration with other things going on in cities. We hope that this part of the webinar will explore how to move away from processes that are led by the potential of technology rather than the needs of citizens. And we'll be sharing some learning from the Replicate project, specifically the Created by Us work strand, which was one of the 3 strands of work within the project. And you'll hear more about the other 2 strands later. So to introduce ourselves, I'm Rachel Clark from the Digital Arts Centre Norwest Media Centre. We are the Bristol Living Lab and we were one of the partners in the Replicate project.
And I'm Helen Manchester. I'm an Associate Professor in Digital Inequalities and Urban Futures at the University of Bristol. And I've been working alongside the Norwest Media Centre to understand citizen engagement in the Created by Us element of the Replicate project. So Rachel, at Norwest Media Centre, you've led the activities in the Created by Us work strand. You came to the project, I believe, with a way of working that puts citizens at the heart of innovation. Can you give us a quick outline of the Bristol Approach, please?
Absolutely. And you should see this appearing on your screens now. The Bristol Approach is a 6-step framework for co-creating projects with citizens. And it begins with the needs of communities rather than the capabilities of technology. And relevant tech is used, but it's pulled in, not pushed onto citizens as a predefined solution. The 6 phases are on the screen in front of you, and we'll be running through them in more detail a little bit later. But just to give you some history, the approach was created by Norwest Media Centre, working with our partners Bristol City Council, and with the innovation company Ideas for Change, who are based in Barcelona. The approach itself has been recognised and used around the world, and it was awarded good practice status by Urbact in 2017. Now, the University of Bristol, as Helen said, worked with us at Norwest Media Centre throughout the Created by Us strand of Replicate to identify some key principles that should underpin how we engaged with citizens. Helen, can you tell everyone a little bit more about these principles, what they were, and why you felt it was important to establish them at the very beginning of the Replicate project?
Sure, Rachel. So as I stated earlier, there really is a pressing need to redesign processes of smart city planning to ensure they're more inclusive and not simply led by the needs of big business and or policymakers. This is because digital is increasingly deeply embedded in the city and in all of our lives. Sustainable smart cities then need to recognise and consider the practices of power embedded in the city and that are implicit in smart city development. They also need to understand the influence that this is having on the way that lives can be lived and the inequalities as well that Hayley has introduced us to earlier. I think this is important both for the present, but also in the future in our increasing urban world. So, Rachel, you asked about the principles of engagement. So at the beginning of the project, we recognized really quickly that there were many different partners with very diverse motivations for being involved, different things that they needed to produce as part of the project, and really different understandings of smart city development. So in order to create a shared understanding of what needed to be done in including citizens on the margins in smart city planning, we had to design these very basic principles. In a sense, they gave us a shared language for understanding citizen engagement in the project. So the first of these, as you've seen on your screen for a while, is collaboration. There are 4 different principles. In relation to collaboration, really this was recognizing that we must include ordinary citizens in thinking about smart cities and that this involves collaboration across different sectors. We also recognize the need for the second engagement principle, which is involving multiple voices, interests and expectations at every stage of the work. In particular, in Bristol, we were interested in those who are most excluded from citywide conversations and decision making. Obviously, if you're working with people who are more excluded, then power is also essential, and recognizing the positions of power that are often reproduced in our cities and working to challenge these hierarchies throughout the citizen engagement work was really key. Fourthly, we recognized that we needed to be experimental and collective in our approach to citizen engagement. So we committed as the Bristol pilot to an experimental ethos where we were politically committed to collective learning together and doing and acting together too. We really felt that if we could keep these engagement principles at the heart of the project, then we could include citizens in the city in our planning. So Rachel, given these principles, it would be really great to hear about how we then went ahead to embed these principles in the Created by Us strand on the project.
Absolutely. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes taking you through the 6 phases of the Bristol approach, illustrating how the approach was used within the Replicate project and linking back to those principles that Helen has just articulated. So the first phase of the Bristol approach is called identification, and that's about building relationships with citizens and groups to identify their needs, concerns and opportunities. And so we did this by holding free and low technology events within the community, going out, meeting people where they were, not expecting them to come to us, and making sure that our activities were playful and practical and family friendly where that was possible. An example, we ran pop-up activities at school fairs and playgrounds, and our staff spent a lot of time working in community venues. This is because, as Helen mentioned just this moment ago, we were very conscious of those existing power imbalances, and we made sure to spend lots of time in the community to reach those beyond those who were likely to take part in experimental projects. So community activists and technologies perhaps were quite easy to reach and easy to engage, and we wanted to commit to reaching beyond those groups. The next phase is called framing, and that's all about understanding the issues that emerged in identification in more detail. So identification revealed that several groups were worried about poor air quality, but they were affected in different ways. And these groups were cyclists, drivers, and families walking to school. We worked with each of those groups at dates and times convenient to them to find out what they wanted to know about air quality, what information was lacking, and what did they want to change. By listening to and valuing these multiple voices, as Helen mentioned, that was really vital in understanding the issue in more detail. And we were also able to connect those citizens and community groups with the Replicate partners really early on in the project. The photo you can see on the screen is one of those conversations with a group of cyclists. The third phase is called design, where we identify technology that could be used to gather the information that's lacking. Here we worked with technologists to identify existing tech that could help, such as the Luftdaten sensor kits, which are pictured on screen. And we commissioned an artist to work with the affected groups of citizens to develop a portable sensor that they could test whilst on the move. And that ended up being shaped like a ladybird, which you'll see in a subsequent slide. We also held workshops teaching social housing tenants to make the Luftdaten sensors themselves. And we had continual conversations with citizens about data, asking them what they were happy to share and how we could have them have more control over their data. And I hope just from this short example, you can really see the engagement principles of collaboration and collective endeavour in action. Moving on to the fourth phase, which is called deployment. This involves citizens testing sensor technology out in the real world. So in Created by Us, we were deliberately experimental, as Helen said, and we used different sensors and gathered different types of data to build up a really rich and local data picture. We had 13 community venues fitted with stationary sensors and 6 citizens testing the Ladybird sensor, and you can see an early prototype on the left of your screen. They had those on their bicycles, in their cars, and attached to their bags while they went out on walks. It was really important for us to encourage citizens to act as human sensors as well, to record their movements and their feelings, to add context to what was otherwise numerical statistical data. The penultimate phase of the approach is called Orchestration, and that focuses on sharing learning. We commissioned a digital artist to create visualizations of the air quality data, and they were printed on postcards, which you can see on the left, and given out at local events. We also ran workshops where citizens learned about interpreting the data they'd gathered and designed and made objects to share their data stories, such as the travel gauge on the left, where people mapped out how they arrived on that day and what their transport choices were, how that might contribute to air pollution. The last phase is called Outcome, where you reflect on what's happened and whether you've made progress in tackling the issues that were identified. As a result of Created by Us, citizens have told us that they've sought cleaner travel routes, they've changed their travel behaviour, and some of them have even created their own projects. Through Created by Us, Norwest Media Centre engaged over 1,000 people with this process of citizen sensing, and you can see a couple of comments from those citizens on the screen. So Helen has been observing and working alongside us at Norwest Media Centre throughout Replicate as an educational researcher. And as a result, Helen, you've developed a model of learning to characterise the work that's been done. Can you tell everyone a little bit about this?
Sure. I'm going to run through this quite quickly, but there is a paper written about this, so people are free to contact me after the seminar. So I believe educational questions are key to building more inclusive, democratic and innovative smart cities. So drawing on a long history of educational research and learning theory, we have devised and written about a model for citizen participation and citizen learning in smart city projects. The first element of this is that citizens should be considered active learners when engaging with technology development. They should be considered able to contribute to urban planning. And you can see in Rachel's example of where Norwest worked alongside communities, building relationships with them in community venues and asking them about their concerns from the start, that this was embedded in the Created by Us work. The second element of the learning model is that smart cities don't happen in a vacuum, they happen somewhere, and we have to take account, therefore, of existing spaces and places, of hierarchies of power, and of histories that can influence knowledge and learning together. I think it's really important here that the projects are embedded in local communities and tested in local communities, and that critical digital literacies are developed with citizens, where they're actually generating dialogue between themselves, technologists and policymakers in order to attend to the inequalities we see in our cities. The third element of the model is to recognize that digital is actually the stuff of everyday life. And it's really important that if we're thinking about critical digital learning, we make things visible and part of the learning experience rather than hiding the digital away behind interfaces. So here Rachel discussed the ladybirds. She talked about the Luftdaten sensors, where citizens were actually involved themselves in collecting and making sense of that data and what that meant for them in their everyday lives.
So before we close this session, we'd like to share with you some of our conclusions for how smart city projects might need to change in order to create cities that are more fair, just and inclusive. And the first of these is building flexibility and co-creation into the way that projects are planned. By identifying the community's challenges on their behalf or deciding a technical solution before you've engaged with them can actually alienate citizens and potentially limit the impact of the project. And secondly, we recommend being open to understanding how citizens perceive and use technology, rather than promoting that they just accept it, having a genuine dialogue into what it means for them.
Thanks, Rachel. And I think I'd just add to that the need for reflexivity around the models of learning we're adopting in smart city projects, thinking carefully about the assumptions that we're making about citizens and their capabilities, interests and concerns. Trying to adopt a model of learning alongside citizens that is collaborative, creative, and enables critical learning for all in order to include them in powerful urban design processes. And lastly, I think it's incredibly important to bring citizen engagement out of the silos in smart city projects, and that this involves a commitment from both policymakers, technology companies, funders, and indeed citizens themselves.
So we hope that you can see how the Created by Us work within Replicate demonstrates that there is an alternative approach to top-down projects and that this approach works. For Northwest Media Centre and the University of Bristol, the focus within Created by Us was not necessarily on creating smart cities, but cities where citizens had the confidence, the knowledge and the digital literacies to create lasting positive change. We believe that smart technology can definitely be an enabler of change, but that citizens should be the ones driving it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel and Helen, for your great presentation. I have seen that there is a strong case from the educational perspective in your presentation. And I have just one question. I'm going to open the floor for the Q&A because I guess that there are many questions just for you after my main question. I would like to focus on your concept of the critical digital literacies that you mentioned. And it's very exciting to notice that, for example, from the University of Oxford, we've been trying to unpack the concept of smart city in an article called Unplugging the Smart City. The point is that I would like you to expand a little bit on this concept of the critical digital literacies, not just from the data privacy, but also from the data ownership. Have you reached this point, how to prepare the citizenship from these digital literacies to enable data ownership?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, I think it's very complex. There's a long history of research into the idea of critical digital literacies. And I think they go right back to literacy scholars in the past who talked about the need to understand the world rather than just being able to read the world. And I think through engaging citizens directly in something that matters to them in their lives, then they become motivated to learn about things related to data ownership. It's also, I think, about making the way that data is collected about our lives increasingly visible to citizens. So there's a role there for us all to play in ensuring that this dialogue happens. And that, you know, often often as technology companies, we're seeking to hide the collection of data for various reasons. And actually what we need to do is to make that visible to citizens so that a genuine dialogue can be created. And this can also help the technology companies to develop technologies that are more acceptable to citizens as well, I believe.
Thank you very much, Helen. I would like to open the floor for any question to either to Rachel or Helen.
Yeah, hello, this is Kai from Essen. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I have a question to either one of you or a comment in the question maybe. First of all, the question is about your approach of thinking that it's a valuable addition to also have human sensors, as you called them, so to also get data about how people feel in during and connecting this to the numbers that the sensors can collect, to give some perspective to the numbers, as you said. So I was wondering, was this also a demand from the citizens, and how well did they buy into this, and also how are the arrangements about this data that is being then collected on this human subjective scale? And secondly, I was also loving the approach, but also wondering about the replicability and also maybe the necessity of running through this process in repetition in other cities, because obviously maybe, for example, looking specifically at the solutions about these sensors, do you have the feeling that this should be a process that is repeated in many cities, or would you rather assume that once in such a model program these kind of sensors are developed, that it's then rather a matter of replicating the same kind of sensors and discussing them with the citizens, or generally, how do you see a rollout of the outcomes of these processes?
Great, thank you for your question. This is Rachel, and I'll try and answer both. The first one about the human sensors aspect of the project was developed very early on in our collaborations with artists, who were really key to supporting the engagement and being like a key driver of that. We invited people very early on to think about their 5 senses, so taste, touch, sight, sound and smell, and our experiences moving through the world as people and gathering data in those ways, which brought to the forefront things that, as Helen said before, are sometimes invisible, and we wanted to make sure that that human aspect wasn't overlooked. So people made notes in data diaries whilst they were carrying the sensors to map out different things that had happened to them on the route. So for instance, if they got stuck behind lots of traffic, or if there was some road works that were creating lots of fumes, so that could be mapped onto the statistical data that might have shown a big spike at some point during their journey, but without that contextual information might not mean very much more. And so it was really key to have the physical and the digital intersecting in that way, and the artists were really supportive of developing that.
Just to add one thing to that, I think very often in smart cities there's a real focus on quantitative data and statistical data, and we were really keen that the lived experiences of people in the city were recognised through these more qualitative, subjective experiences being brought to the fore.
And in relation to your second question about replicability, we very much hope that the Bristol approach is a replicable format, and that it's iterative. So you might go through the 6 steps and evaluate and decide that you want to try something similar that builds on what you've done before, but isn't directly duplicating what you've done before. And that's very much the hope for the approach. It's not necessarily people taking the approach and copying what we've done, but it's using those 6 steps almost as prompts to help you get going, to work with your own communities, to look at their needs. And if you end up using the same sensors as us, then great, but that comes from the needs that your community have identified rather than a direct copying of the approach.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? We can see that the approach, citizen sensing and centric approach of Bristol is very aligned with the replication philosophy and replicate project. So any other question over there? Otherwise, we are going to move on to the second slot, technology, data and democracy by Theo Trifonas from the University of Bristol. Good morning, Theo.
Good morning, Igor. And Zoe, who I presume is on the other end of the line.
Yeah.
Good morning, this is Zoe.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Theo Trifonas. I'm an associate professor in smart cities at the University of Bristol. And along with my colleague, Zoe, we'll discuss about in particular some aspects of governance and exposing people to working with data and how we approach it from both from a technical and we're capitalizing on the Bristol approach to create hopefully a system that works. So Zoe?
Yes, so you've heard a bit about the Bristol approach already from Rachel in the previous session. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and she gave the example of the air quality project, but it has been used in the Replicate project in a previous iteration, which was about humidity in homes. And as discussed, it is something that is replicable, but the idea is really to engage with people on their level. So it is making sure that people can actually identify their own issues in their communities and frame them. So this is where the technology comes in and data, and working with people that maybe communities in general wouldn't necessarily connect with. But again, we discussed the issue of power, and so we're trying to get rid of the hierarchies so that people feel like they can actually use this approach and work with technology and work with data and each other across the public sector as well to make the changes or find solutions to the issues facing them. So this is where we go from identifying the problem to framing the problem to the design. And with the previous slot, we saw the air quality sensors designed, but this could be another sensor. It could be something else altogether. It is quite an open approach. And once that has been designed, we're going to the deployment, and that is actually testing that in the real world environment. So whatever tools have been created, they actually are going to be tested and tried out, and they may work, they might not work, but it's really important to have that approach to get them out there and try them and getting people testing new things. Orchestration is the next phase of the Bristol approach, and this is sharing the tools and the data with others. So this is where you can celebrate if it's worked, and perhaps it has, perhaps it hasn't, but you can actually then start to dive into what more you may need to do. And also who's been working on these things. There's a lot going on locally, but also on an international level. So this is, again, finding out what tools are then out there that may link up with the type of tools you've created. If you've had some successful collection of data, you can then get to the outcome point where you can evaluate that and you can see, oh, well, we have actually made a change. People, for example, with the air quality project, really noticed some differences in the routes that they took to and from work, using their sensors, using their human data. And this is something that is quite exciting to actually see that people are collecting data, using technology, as well as their own human sensing. And this is where it's iterative, so you may go back to the beginning and start another project again. So this can be used in multiple ways. This is an excellent way, though, to make sure that people can participate in a meaningful fashion. and trying to, I guess, break down this digital divide as well. Connecting people with data and really understanding what that means often does involve collecting some human data, because there is often a disconnect between the digital world and the analog world.
Thank you, Zoe. And I think we realized very soon that one of the major mediums people to engage in this debate is the data they generate. And we are very much in this sense proponents and supporters of the idea that this data should be open, but in the way of working with the data, we also find caveats that we have to have into mind when we try to engage people on the basis of the data they generate or the data they have access to through city sources, that we follow specific rules that ensure that people get the most out of that interaction. In the context of Replicate, for example, we collect air quality data from a number of locations. You see here, for example, locations of our Luftdaten sensors. But as we mentioned earlier, it's not just about a single piece of technology. So in the context of our air quality monitoring activities, we have at least 3-4 different technologies, including smart citizen kits, a small pilot of the Array of Things, a project from Chicago, and also some commercial sensors that we've leased and used in schools. So we have a variety of data sources, and we quickly came across the question of how should we make data available? How should the citizen approach that? And one of the things that comes to mind when we see the next slide is that, if we could go to the next slide, please. That we do believe that open data increases transparency of decision making and innovate and facilitates innovation and makes the creation of new apps and new technologies possible, as well as giving the ability to the citizen to engage with several topics, such as, for example, equality. But of course, the more raw data we make available, the more we potentially expose an individual's lifestyle options or other aspects of the personality to risk it. So we're very mindful of that, and that's why we're not making data public on the onset, but we go through cycles of people understanding the implications of data they generate themselves in a way that Zoe just described. And we also want to give them the dimension that they might not be just because of their own personal data being exposed, but because of there are other data sets that could affect communities. For example, it's noted that crime statistics or school league tables for that matter may affect prices of real estate in an area, exactly because people may develop perceptions, accurate or not, about the quality of life in a specific area in the city. So here we see, for example, open data set on crime reporting, and it's been shown in the past that sort of data sets like that may affect real estate prices. And so we're very mindful of that, and we wanted to include that into both the ways we approach the citizen engagement and their involvement into technology discussions and design, but also in the way we work as technology partners to deliver a solution. So, for example, in air quality intervention, we had regular meetings between the quality team of the council, the technology partners, so that we understand the implications of data collection, we understand the accuracy of the data, and we plan many more experiments with technology that is collocated, and we collect data from a number of locations that are both monitored with high-end scientific instruments as well as citizen-led, citizen-created technologies, so that we can compare and contrast and have an understanding of where and when citizen-led innovation can be used as a trend indicator and complement the data we gather with our scientific equipment. Zoe?
Thank you, Theo. I guess we're on to discussing a bit more in detail about the outcomes of this project around data, open and otherwise. And I think what Theo just went over around open data and a bit about just democracy and people's ability to access it is really important, as well as the unintended consequences. There are tremendous amounts of data available, but it's really important for citizens to know what data they can find, what data they can trust, what's available from their local cities. And in Bristol, we do have an open data platform that citizens can access some of this data, which is quite important. There are also other sources available as well, but it's really key that citizens become more aware of the data that they collect and the data that they share. And this is one of the elements of this project that we've helped increase that awareness. As well as increasing the awareness of that open data, and not just the local open data, but sites, for example, like Luftdaten, which is an international site, so people can see what's happening in other parts of the world. By collecting their own data and participating in this project, citizens have a better understanding of what evidence is and how it can be used, which is really important at the moment. There's been a disconnect between data and evidence on a sort of global level. So to get people really being able to feel confident understanding what data is, how it's collected, what evidence is, and how they're interacting with their own data is really, really key. Smart city technology can be used by citizens if they understand it and feel like they have some agency in the process and ownership over the data that they are using, and also whether or not they want to share that data. The slide that you can see right now has a couple of postcards on it. So these were created by a digital artist. The data is air quality data collected at a local school, and the different colors show different intensities of nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, and ozone. And on the postcard, it's quite difficult to read, it's a bit small, I apologize. It says it's putting the data into your hands, and it's a bit of a provocation that if you could share this data with someone, who would you share it with, whether that's a policymaker or a politician, but making sure that people feel like they own and can access this data and also use it to leverage change is something that we feel really strongly about has been an impact of this project.
And of course, in this setting, there are implications for the technologies used. And myself as a technologist, sort of thinking about the challenges, the accumulation of data sets and from multiple sources that we mentioned, calls for architectures that are able to accommodate large volume of different looking data. But it's not just the technology, from a technical perspective, it's not that the technology per se challenges, also the process we use to collaborate with others to get this data in one place, to develop models that are compatible with one another, that we get data from Luftdaten sensors and we get data from Area of Things and data from our own created by our sensors and a smart citizen kit, and they all have different representations, and we bring them together in one notional state so that we can develop insights based on what the data is telling us. We can turn into evidence, if you like. And how this is happening, not just in terms of the technology used, representations of data, but also which people need to come together to discuss these issues from within the partner organizations as a technical but processual oriented issue, which has been also very important to clarify in the context. And of course, making sense of the data, which would include participation from the expert who understands the chemistry and the environmental aspects of air quality, but know nothing about data and technology in that sense. The computer scientist, the council officer, as well as the citizens themselves, who we heard the examples of people who understood their mobility patterns and the impact that had on them as the air quality had on them as they moved into the city. And so based on that, part of our answer in Bristol in the next slide, we've tried to summarize over the past 2 slots that they're created by us, for example, had a number of examples where engaged citizens contributed to the design of citizen-led sensors and innovation in that sense. So hopefully these are literacies that we developed through the program for people to get engaged in that platform. They had hopefully better understanding of what data they generate and what part of that data concerns themselves and exposes themselves potentially to risk through participating into creating the data use agreements. From a working practice perspective, I mentioned that we held regularly joint meetings between a number of technology partner stakeholders and city council, so that we are in tune with the objectives of, say, the air quality intervention. And from a technical design perspective, reflecting on what we discussed earlier about the grassroots somehow being represented in a way that would allow an experimenter, a citizen, an innovator to engage with the city data in ways that a monolithic top-down design does not allow, is very important to be somehow reflected in the technical architecture. And I think on that note, we can move into our conclusions, which, to start with, I think preparation among partners to be ready to engage in a multitude of forms has been key for Bristol. Mere awareness by just having a website or posting something on a placard in the city might not be enough for producing something that works. We might need to actively get into the communities, bring people on board, go through a period of ensuring that people develop the literacies required to engage with the topic, and so in a sense making the process more participatory. And as I said just in the previous slide, that this needs to be reflected in the technology architecture as well, that needs to allow the variance, if you like, so that people can set up their own experiments, they can generate their own innovation, and that could be fostered under a platform that can facilitate that. Anything else, Zoe?
I think I would just, I guess, reiterate just how important it is to making sure that the process is participatory and accessible to citizens, because even if we have all of the data available and all the technology in the cities, if people can't engage with it or they don't understand it, it won't do the average citizen any good. So I guess that's just my lasting message.
Thank you very much, Zoe and Theo, for your presentation. Again, before I'm going to open the floor for discussion, I have just one general question. We are hearing from Bristol that the city-centric approach, I think, is very successfully blending entrepreneurship and activists, academia. You are two institutions representing academia and activism or entrepreneurship to some extent. We are seeing how civil society is engaged, citizens directly are engaged, how the public bodies, I mean the city council, is advocating this approach. But given that the rest of the replicate cities, they are, let's say, led by the private sector, and this question is related to the feasibility and the replicability of your approach. My question is very straightforward. How the cities, I mean, Bristol approach is including the private sector, and given that, for example, from the data perspective, there are many business models that should be designed, should be developed. So how are you including any kind of procurement policies in order to include the private companies or the private sector in this approach? Or maybe it's too early, or I don't know. It's an open question.
And
I think I can answer.
To procurement.
Sorry, Theo.
No, it's fine.
I guess I was just going to say, from NOAA's Media Centre's perspective, as far as the Bristol approach goes, we've also been delivering workshops using this approach to practitioners in other fields as well. So as far as continuing professional development, we've delivered sessions to landscape architects who often work in the private sector and the public sector. So they're able to start to implement some of these techniques in that realm, which is, yeah, I guess it's not necessarily in the procurement, but it is a way of doing co-design that can impact the development of healthier cities.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I was going to say exactly that. Formal procurement, I'll have to pass to my colleagues from the City Council, but I want to make explicit that our technology partnership does include private sector. So when we meet regularly as ICT partners of Replicate, we have Bristol's Open, we have Zeta Networks, who are partners that are innovators and the work in the sector. So although there's not a formal framework in that sense, it's something we can extract from the learning work and see how people engage with innovation. Maybe there are formal points that can be extracted from there. But I think there's both in the ethos and the culture of the city that entrepreneurial spirit that we want to capitalize on bringing the value out of these interventions, and not necessarily purely economic, but public to have impact in the city, and that would have an element of economic development and growth as well as improving life. So there's definitely awareness to that and concern, and the private sector is engaged. It's just I think we don't have a formal framework to develop this partnership, but it's something that can be developed through our Replicate experience.
I understand. My question was, and I'm going to open the floor for discussion. It seems that we are taking for granted the participation of the private sector. Maybe it is because it's already there. But the point is that maybe you didn't mention because it's so obvious and so implicit that is in the culture, in the entrepreneurial culture of business and the private sector of the city and the Bristol. So it's why I got the point. So any other question in the audience?
Maybe Kai again from Essen, a general question, because you explained also what you want to achieve with your approach. And I was just wondering also if you have any possibility to measure how successful you actually are in sense of also involving then citizens to use this data, or even entrepreneurs to try to create solutions for the improvement of citizens of such data, because I think it's really a tough question also to evaluate what kind of extra value a city actually gets in providing these kind of open data platforms. So do you have any way of measuring success of your open data approach? And if yes, how is the result of such a measurement?
Yes, definitely. There is, as part of the project requirement, to monitor, the impact, and so we have a list of KPIs that we're collecting in a technical document, and they may be simple things as the number of downloads, number of visits, all the way through. We'll see later on in the energy interventions, for example, energy saved or other metrics that would have meaning in the context of use, and so we're monitoring this through KPIs that are collected in the technical document and still considered in some ways, it will be part of the project results, I suppose, the overall evaluation. So we're not talking only about open data, because some of the data, as I mentioned earlier, may not necessarily be made open because of GDPR or other implications, or they might need curation or some kind of anonymization processing before they're in the open. But we're talking about the effectiveness, if you like, of the interventions as a whole, and so we're capturing a number of KPIs across the different activities to show that it worked or what was the state of effectiveness, if you like, in that sense.
Thank you very much, Theo and Kay, for the question. I guess that you can move on to the third slot. One city approach and inclusive futures.
Yeah, hi, it's Hayley here again. So we're going to talk about the One City approach and inclusive futures. And I'm guessing that actually this might answer some of your questions as well, because about how the local authority are using an approach similar to the Bristol approach. So I'd like to introduce my colleagues who are going to join me on this session. Rosanna Chechenia.
Hello, yes, Chichian. I am a senior lecturer at the Department of Computer Science at the University of Bristol.
And David Tudgy.
Hello, I'm the Project Development Officer for Bristol Energy Network.
So, Bristol has launched its first ever One City plan, and it sets out ambitious targets for the future of Bristol, decade by decade, for the next 30 years. So the approach then, it's a partnership approach across the charitable organisations. Many citizens have joined this approach as well, the academic organisations and all of the organisations in the public sector. And it started with a lot of very large meetings with a lot of people talking about their issues. And this is what has brought the priorities to the fore. So the plan then sets out a vision and goals, and that they fall under 6 priority themes: health and well-being, economy, homes and communities, environment, learning and skills and connectivity. The plan is a dynamic, and it will evolve as our collective thinking evolves and develops, and new challenges and opportunities emerge over time. In essence, it's agile, it's adaptable, and it will be resilient to change. So, building on this then, we are in the process of developing our smart city strategy, which is using the same principles and building blocks. So within the smart city plan, the smart city strategy, we are looking at 6 foundations. We want to focus on city challenges that have been raised by our citizens, but also that are shown through data. We want to be able to offer world-class connectivity. We want to create a citywide innovation ecosystem, and we want to deliver responsible innovation using co-design wherever possible. We want to manage innovation to ensure the best results for the city, and we also want to reimagine how public services will be delivered in the future. Replicate is one of our key programs of work, and within this, we are trying to ensure that whenever possible, we work with stakeholders to deliver solutions to their issues. So within the work with the retrofit package, we have the Smart Home project, where we're delivering energy efficiency retrofitting alongside trialling smart appliances, which come at no cost to those participating. The smart devices are hooked up to smart meters via a VPN, which is a secure virtual network, to the Bio Smart City platform. As you know, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and in this case, this is no different. So all eligible homes have been encouraged to take part in the design and implementation of the project right through the different stages from start to finish. And Bristol Energy Network have led our engagement work. Working in collaboration with the University of Bristol, we are also co-designing with the participants the energy demand trial, which will be exploring the potential of smart appliances to communicate with a new energy demand management system in the city, which will be delivered by NEC. This experiment is essential as we move away from coal and oil-based energy towards cheaper energy and cleaner energy. The demand for electricity at peak times of the day could send the grid crashing, so it's important to be able to turn things off or on to ensure that this does not happen. The trial will do just that. However, the parameters have been designed by those taking part to ensure that they can better take advantage of both lower tariffs whilst also keeping control of their energy usage in their home. So I'm going to pass over to David now, who's going to talk about the work that the Energy Network did.
Thank you, Hayley. Bristol Energy Network has been working with communities across the city since 2010. We're an umbrella organisation for individuals and community groups with an interest in energy. We believe that to create an energy system that works for everyone, everyone must be involved in building these energy systems. Therefore, we are actively working to include all of Bristol's communities to work to support them to run their own energy projects. We were asked by Bristol City Council to lead on the engagement for the smart homes element of the Replicate project and co-design with the community an action plan to engage residents who live in the communities that are included in the project area. The Ashley, Easton and Lawrence Hill area of Bristol is the city's most diverse and multicultural area. Working with these community partners, we did an asset map exercise of organisations and local citizens looking at their issues and challenges to understand how their objectives aligned with this project. We did this by setting up a community engagement group, inviting local partners who identified key issues of fuel poverty and marginalisation of underrepresented groups. This then informed key activities which were carried out, which are the creation of an energy champions programme, ensuring that low-income households and multicultural communities were prioritised, and involving them in setting out a clear priority group description, as well as a methodology on reaching those communities and embedding knowledge around energy issues within the community. And this also involved them designing a mobile exhibition feature home for the project and designing accessible marketing materials as well as project paperwork, including expression of interest forms and the terms of reference and conditions of the project. They also were involved in identifying 10 early adopters to test the smart homes installations before we rolled it out across the area, all of which ensured a representative participation in the project. We explored different types of exhibition vehicles for events. The exhibition vehicles we found out and about at the market were typically petrol or diesel, which presented the wrong message about clean air. And therefore we explored electric vehicles, and even an electric milk float was suggested by the group. We finally agreed on an electrical tricycle bike with a trailer full of interactive games which highlighted the energy saving potential of retrofit and smart measures. So the mobile future home was developed and designed by the community champions with the support of artists from Mufti Games, a local artist company, and Knoll West Media Centre, and was the main marketing tool to get people involved in the Replicate Smart Homes project. This is now a regular site around the city and the project area of Ashley, Easton and Lawrence Hill, promoting behaviour changes across the city. The Energy Champions programme, developed with champions involving 18 local people, led to the lead engagement work. They have spoken to over 2,000 people at over 50 events. The Community Energy Champions and Ben's role and approach was recognised nationally by the Smart Cities UK Award and are shortlisted for the Eurocities 2019 Annual Innovation Awards for its achievements. Champions have now gone on to develop and lead their own projects with the support of Bristol Energy Network, identifying funding and collaboration opportunities. The champions are now involved in running DIY solar panel projects to help people understand how solar panels work, also taking part and involving the community in draft proofing workshops and leading thermal imaging energy surveys in homes, as well as setting up their own local energy groups within their neighbourhoods.
So then going back to smart homes, it's Sorry, it's not just about energy efficiency, it's all about how energy assets can be connected to the smart platform and energy demand management system. Currently in the UK, fossil fuels meet peak energy demands. So that's at 5 o'clock in the evening when everybody comes home from work or from school, everybody switches on their appliances and the demand peaks. So Bristol has pledged to be carbon neutral by 2030. And if we're going to reduce these daily spikes in usage, we need to change behaviour. We need to develop an energy demand management process. We want to understand how we can change behaviours of household energy use at peak times and so reduce the demand for fossil fuel generation. I'm going to introduce you now to Rosanna.
Yes, thank you, Hayley. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about one of the more technical sides of the Replicate project, and this is the actual trial design for the smart homes. So as Hayley said, to be carbon neutral by 2030, which is Bristol's goals, we have to move to clean energy. And so clean energy sources, renewable energy sources are great when everything is available in supply. But what happens when we have shortage? And this happens because clean energy sources are obviously very dependent on the weather. Let's say it's a quiet day, there is no wind, and we don't have enough generation. So what do? Do we go back to fossil fuels, or do we do something about it? And our suggestion in this project is to ask our citizens, to ask the householders to reduce the consumptions at the times when the generation is low. And this is where we're looking at developing an energy management system. So how will this energy management system work? When the generation is in a short supply, the price will be triggered by the grid as a high price, and that information will be sent to the energy management system. Now, the households, the citizens, will participate in this by first and foremost registering their preferences of how they are willing to engage with the system. What are the times, for example, by which they are needing to have their washings done, or what time do they want their dishwasher to be operated? So these preferences then will be kept in the system, and if the high price signal comes at a time when the preferences are agreeable for interruption or delay, so these appliances will be interrupted or delayed by the smart energy management system. After a time when the generation is sufficient again, when let's say the wind has picked up or the sun has started to shine brighter, the grid will send a high price reversal signal or low price signal to the energy management system, which will check with the preferences of the households again for the appliance operation, and will resume or start running the dishwashers or washing machines to complete the tasks that the houses need to have done. So then the question is, how do we go about designing this system? And picking up on the previous parts of these presentations, we talked about Bristol's approach, and this is what we really did here. We carried out a very citizen-focused and multi-view representation exercise, where we started by using the Bristol Energy Network as our partners to enroll citizens to provide interview input to us. So we had 28 citizens who spent time talking to us about how they want to use their appliances, what are their daily practices, what are their concerns, and then taking this interview information as a starting point, we came up with some ideas about what kind of energy management system we can design. Then we took these ideas into the co-design workshops, and we did carry out 2 co-design workshops with the intended users of this system, where we flashed out these initial ideas and came up with some suggestions about what we are going to have as an actual system to run the trial. And then even after that, we still developed the ideas and still went back to the stakeholders, to our intended users, to validate the the proposed designs. Just to give an idea about what kind of activities we actually carried out during these co-design workshops. This is an example of a citizen journey. How will citizens go through journey from the point when they get the information about the enrollment with this trial to the time when they have completed the trial and get the rewards. And then for each of those potential steps in the journey, we identified a number of things that could potentially be preventative or stop or interrupt the ability and willingness of people to actually continue taking part in this workshop. And a number of concerns were voiced, starting from the things that, well, will I be able to understand the invitation email, for example, or the invitation material to how to get engaged with this trial, to things like, well, what's going to happen if the automation takes over my life? For example, will I be able to host a dinner party and get my dishes washed by the time when then I need them, rather than the smart energy management system deciding that actually it's too high a price and I cannot run my dishwasher. And so the other thing, by the end of it, they wanted to be able to see the results, to have a visual understanding of how the actions have changed in terms of saving the CO2 emissions or saving some amount of money. So what is the result of it? So this is one example of the process through which we went in designing the energy management system. And just to draw the conclusion about our key learnings from this activity. And so we thought that the key parts will be related to technology, but we were completely taken by surprise with the findings that the biggest difference that we can make is in understanding how people view themselves. They don't see themselves as consumers of some energy services, but more importantly, they see themselves as active participants in delivering the energy services. And this is not surprising, because when we want to deliver a management system for this energy used by smart appliances, we ask people to buy smart appliances. We ask people to allow us to intervene into their daily lives and interfere with their, practices. And so we are really asking them to be active parts of this energy service delivery. The other thing was about how people related to the results of the savings that they will obtain from this service. And surprisingly, 2/3 of those participants said that actually we don't want to keep this money to ourselves. We want to put it back into our community. We want to install battery banks. We want to have food growing gardens and projects in our communities. And then finally, the technology design itself, as already was mentioned by previous colleagues, was not for the technology design purpose itself, but was to try and meet the needs of a local community, to try and support the demand that they have within the communities themselves. So this is what I have to say, and I think I just will pass it back to Hayley again.
Yeah, so what I'd like to do now is just show a short video which kind of demonstrates the impact that this project has had and that the approach that we've taken has resulted in.
The Smart Homes project is part of the Replicate project, which is an EU-funded Horizons 2020 research and development project. And in the city of Bristol, we're looking at how we can work with citizens to see how technology can help tackle some of the challenges we face regarding energy and transport issues. We've commissioned a community engagement group led by Bristol Energy Network, and they're working with designer makers, Mufti Games and the In Bristol Studios to help us recruit, engage, build trust in the local community. We'll be deploying smart appliances in 150 homes in the east of Bristol, and those appliances are designed so they can work with our future energy system, which will be making better use of renewable energy, and that will all be linked up into our new Smart City platform.
This is our future home. This project is about behaviour change as much as it's about an intervention of a new appliance. So we've been really keen to ensure that behaviour change is something that is happening throughout the community. By having champions that actually are within those communities, we're able to not just share what the project's offering in terms of a new appliance, but we're also able to embed knowledge within the communities.
My name is Angelora Chacon. I am the manager for Bristol Black Carers. I found out about this project when we did a joint project for the community, and I was curious to find out about it. And then I said, well, can I have one? So I can. And I was told, well, yes, if you're going to be a champion, no problem. I want to try the smart because first and foremost, if you're going to sell something to someone, you should know how it works. So when I try to tell my service users about the smart machine, I should be able to say to them, I know what it does and I can walk you through it. If we want to build our community, we need to use trust so that people can follow. And being a champion, I will be leading by example and be able to highlight the good points and also point out what's not working.
There are smart plugs and there's a little green box called a mini server in the residents' homes. That's gathering all of the energy data. It's then sending that securely back to databases in the city centre. We are able to put that all together and get an idea of the trends. Because this is a European project, we've got people all over Europe working on this. The people in Germany are building a system where the energy data can be monitored, and if they're seeing spikes in the trends and excess energy usage, they can send back messages to the system to say, pause the washing machine and resume at cheaper energy tariff times, such as the early hours of the morning or at the weekend.
Yes, I would encourage individuals in my community to get involved with smart technology. We are getting older in terms of population. Technology is going to be here, so we need to make it our friend. If we don't, we feel frustrated being forced to use something that we're not comfortable with. As things change for the future, we can control the narrative of making it work for us.
So that's the end of our presentation. Does anybody have any questions for us?
Yes, I have one question, Holly. Just I was curious about the point of the 2/3 of respondents giving the savings to community. So I have just one question for you. Is Bristol foreseeing developing any alternative model, business model as cooperatives, for example, that they are quite common in countries like Germany?
So I can't talk for the city, the whole of the city. I can say that we are looking, as part of research, we're looking at a number of alternative local energy system models, at least 8 or 9 of them, and we will be putting them forward as information, and then it will be up to local communities if they do want to pick up one or the other.
Yeah, just to answer that question as well, Bristol Energy Network's got a number of different community groups and developing their own community energy models. And it's really about the inclusive economy, about how do we actually translate these megawatts or kilowatts into local benefit. And I'm pleased to say that we're currently developing an onshore wind turbine in one of the poorer communities of Bristol, and that'll be owned solely by that community. It's been developed by that community, and the profits coming back, as well as the thermal imaging surveys. The business model there is another community interest company, and it's basically putting the profits back into offering surveys for free in fuel poor homes, whilst charging full price to those that can afford to pay. So it's creating those business models that enable the projects to develop by putting the money back into the communities and helping the communities to grow collectively.
Thank you, Dave. Any other question on the audience?
I just add one last thing to that, that the Bristol City Council has been a key ingredient to enabling community energy groups to develop energy projects. So when developing projects, local authorities or companies that engage communities in this way get much better uptake, and the communities very supportive of what goes forwards when they're involved in this way.
Thank you, very clarifying. Well, it seems that we can wrap up the session. Okay, thank you first and foremost to all the speakers, Rachel, Helen in the first slot, Zoe and Theo, and in the last one, Rosanna, Dave, and Harley. From the University of Oxford, I would like to highlight some aspects on the city-centric approach that has been presented in the session on the 5th webinar of the City-to-City Learning Programme. In the first slot, just briefly, I would like to emphasize the importance of the critical digital literacies when it comes to the citizen sensing projects, as we have here from Helen and Rachel. In the second slot, I think that we have just been here many aspects about the complexity of data and technology, and it's not just about open data, as we can see. At the moment, we have this kind of big religion of data that is called dataism, and it's around us, and we need to distinguish which kind of data we need to manage. In the third slot, regarding the energy network, we can see the importance of the grassroots innovation and the way that in Bristol is taking place through the energy system, energy network systems, and the importance of the behavior and how to tailor this behavior and how to engage with citizens at this regard. The video is going to be uploaded soon, today or tomorrow. So thank you very much for your participation. You can contribute and add comments using Replicate EU hashtag or City2CityLearning, or both of them. And the video is going to be on the site. And I wouldn't like to finish this almost the end of the program without presenting the next and the last and not least session that is going to be led by Nilüfer, our Turkish city, on the 20th of November with the title of the Socio-Economic Development from Below. As you can see and you can notice, they are very connected, and we are going to see how Nilüfer is invigorating this kind of bottom-up approach, as we can see from Bristol, but in another different context, not in the UK, but in Turkey. Thank you very much.